these advocates for plant-based diets, they just stop in the statistics at the point that they're interested in. They say livestock uses a lot of land, and they omit to say positively.
Hello, me folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. Happy New Year. Happy 2024. My name is Francisco Najar. I'm your host today. I'm flying solo, like Dr. Bass likes to mention. We had some questions this past year, this 2023, on sustainability, and we talked recently, or not so recently. I can't remember which RMC it was, with Dr. Ty Lawrence. And we talk about the use of water on the kill floor and on meat processing facilities. And we're getting questions from consumers as well, small meat processors. And there's some data out there that I keep getting. And I want to put and for those folks that are listening on their car, not watching this on YouTube, but there's I was just recently in Mexico, and I saw a lot of images, a lot of signs out there on the city in Monterrey, and saying the question was sin carne o sin agua, which means without meat or without water. And then they got a statement like for each kilo or for each pound of meat, the industry utilizes 15,000 liters of water for its production. And then there's obviously this is an agenda for, like, I don't want to say vegan or vegan, but for the for animal welfare ambientalist agenda, mercy for animals. That's what it says on the corner. But now I think I would like to defend. I like to speak up and talk about this topic to see whether this is true or not. And for that, we have all the way from Spain, someone has done a lot of research on sustainability, livestock. A lot of his PhD was basically looking at some of the means, and he understands the term, and we'll talk here in a minute about the ecology, which we're talking this week also on the Spanish version of this, the difference between ecologist and what was the other one?
Environmentalist.
Yeah. Welcome, Dr. Pablo Manzano. Welcome to MeatsPad today. How's everything? Is it cold in Spain right now, or how is it?
It's pretty cold. It's not as cold as in Kansas, but it's pretty cold for our standards. So we're suffering a cold spell also from polar air that is destabilized, but we're coping.
Perfect. I guess we can start right out this episode, and as I mentioned, this statement from this organization that, I mean, I keep getting questions: is this true? Is this not true? Well, what's the data says about this paper from Dr. Okras, right, from the Netherlands, and we can put the Ooksters, yeah. So and we can put the paper here, and so for you guys that want to understand more about this, which is a very good paper, by the way, explaining and interpreting some of water used, rainfall water. We're gonna start from there. I mean, I know we were talking about some of your work and some of your one of the recent papers that you published, difference between green water footprint, blue water footprint, and gray water footprint. I think there's a lot of things that I would like to cover today, but we can go one by one, I guess.
Yeah, well, we can actually start with that statement. You know that it's not only in Monterrey that you'll find it. It's basically everywhere because it has been taken over by a lot of animal welfareists and a lot of organizations that pretend to convince people to stop eating animal source foods. And we see that high number of liters of water associated with the consumption of animal foods, particularly ruminants, particularly cattle and sheep and goats. And as you were mentioning, the origin of that is, I mean, it's good to explain that it's all a malinterpretation, or even it may be a manipulation of some scientific data. It all starts with the scientist you mentioned, Arvin Hoekstra, a Dutch guy from the Netherlands, a Dutch guy that did a very thorough work in establishing the water footprint of different food items. And he, of course, included some animal food production items like milk, like meat, from different animals. And when he published that, those data were just raw taken by these lobbies. We can talk directly about lobbies that make an interesting reading of it. But what do these 14,000 liters of milk of water mean? They mean that you have what Arvin Hoekstra called the aggregated water footprint, which means that he's putting the three categories he established: green footprint, blue footprint, and gray water footprint together, and just summing up the liters of water. But their meaning is very, very different. Whereas gray water is the amount of water that you need to dilute a pollutant up to concentrations that are not polluting anymore. And blue water is the water that you need to product a given stuff. And to extract that blue water from streams or from lakes or from aquifers, from underground water. The green water is the water that falls on a piece of land that has been used to produce that food item. And that is particularly bad as a publicity, let's say, for animal source foods, and especially for grass-fed beef and grass-fed animals like sheep or goats. And the reason why is because they use a lot of land, and in that land, inevitably, there would be a lot of liters of water falling. Does it make sense to actually say that? Because this is not what Hoekstra says, but this is what all these campaigns say, that you have used 14,000 liters of water to produce a kilogram of meat. Well, it doesn't. And it doesn't for a very simple reason, because all of this green water is rainwater that is going to fall on those lands, no matter if there are animals there or not, because it's a rainfall, it's a precipitation that is associated with the land and with the land use. And we are going to have the same water available, no matter if we have animals there or if we don't. And this is a very important point, and this has been captured by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in a recent review done on water footprint, including also Arvin Hoekstra, who was one of the co-authors. And there, what was recommended very clearly was that other types of measurements for the water footprint, such as the water scarcity index, are used instead of the aggregated water footprint, because they will induce to less error. And it's very, very easy to understand where the mistake comes from. Let's imagine, for example, a mountain area where there are some goats grazing in the shrubs between the rocks. And usually mountain areas do have a lot of rainfall, but there's nothing else you can do there. You cannot do agriculture, you cannot do any other productive activity. So you'll have your goats there, and given the methodology that Arvin Hoekstra uses, the aggregated water footprint will show that they are using huge amounts of water to produce 1 kilogram of meat. However, if we take the water scarcity index, we will see that the water that falls there in terms of rainfall will simply flow into the streams, and the little water that is uptaken by the goats, in this case, will be excreted by urine or will be excreted by sweat, and the amount of water that stays in the meat or in the milk is minimum, so that it doesn't cause the production of that meat or that milk doesn't cause any water scarcity elsewhere. Okay, it's radically different. For example, if we are talking about production in a desert, in an oasis in a desert, because there the water is very scarce, and we may use very little water because of drip technology or because we are having animals that are highly resistant to drought. But all of the water there that is going to be consumed is going to be blue water, which is that water that competes with other uses. The water that we use for a crop, for irrigating a crop, will be evapotranspirated by the plants of the crop and will be lost to the atmosphere and can no longer be used for anything else. So there is a radical difference. Actually, the critics of Hoekstra said that what green water footprint was not really measuring the use of water, but the use of land. And that's another interesting topic, because you asked me on the topics that I deal with in my research, because that's also a source of confusion. Critics of animal agriculture say that ruminants use a lot of land, and that's partly true. But what they don't reflect is when they are comparing with tomatoes or with lettuce, they are not comparing how that land is used by the ones and by the others. Whereas when you plant crops, and including crops to feed animals, you are basically destroying all biodiversity that is there, and crop agriculture, it's one of the worst things that can happen to biodiversity. When you are having grazing animals there that are substituting the ecological function of wild herbivores like bisons, like deer, etc., they are doing very similar roles. And then you cannot consider that they are doing a negative use of the land. If livestock is well managed, is doing rather a positive use of the land, and then, well, basically you cannot blame livestock for it because it's doing a benefit. But once again, these let's say these statistics and these numbers are being used in a partisan way to convey a message that has a political interest or a moral interest, and that is not true. Okay, so you don't use a lot of water to produce a kilogram of grass-fed steak. You don't destroy or degrade a lot of land to produce a kilogram of grass-fed beef steak.
Do you have a data on that? Do you know, like, do we have data on like what the real number is or estimations?
There are good numbers on the estimations of how much land is used to produce beef, for example, but there are also good estimations, very good estimations on the outcome that this land use causes on ecosystems. And we know for sure that when cattle are managed the proper way, they are increasing biodiversity compared to abandoned lands, to lands where there's no livestock or no crops or no anything. And they are increasing ecological function. They are protecting land against land degradation. They are increasing the carbon amount of soils, and they are reducing land degradation or reversing land degradation. So we have measured the effect, and we know this effect is positive, which is what is very ironic from all this discussion. I mean, it's very obvious that these advocates for plant-based diets, they just stop in the statistics at the point that they're interested in. They say livestock uses a lot of land, and they omit to say positively, because livestock uses a lot of land positively, and that cannot be omitted. You see the degree of manipulation. Yeah. And at the Basque Center for Climate Change, we are also applying this framework, let's say, of confused statistics, also for greenhouse gas emissions, because I am sure You have heard that livestock is very bad for the climate, and that it's better to quit livestock and stop eating beef than to leave your car and to stop taking planes. Well, that's not true, and that's not true for the same reason of the other things I'm explaining now, because all the greenhouse gas emissions that have been measured that livestock is emitting, grass-fed livestock, would otherwise be emitted if livestock was abandoned, would be emitted by wild herbivores like bisons, like deer, that would emit very similar quantities of greenhouse gas emissions. So we are achieving basically nothing by abandoning livestock. And we are not realizing that a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions that we interpreted as man-made from livestock are actually natural. In any case, you have shown a little bit before, we have done a popular science video on YouTube called When is Grazing Sustainable? To explain these things, maybe a little bit too technical, but it's also policy oriented, so we did it on purpose. With with references to current literature, to current academic literature, and also with diagrams that also help getting the point.
This is awesome. This is blowing my mind because now we can say we heard Dr. Pablo Manzano that he's one of the expert in the world on sustainable livestock, and so we can say that this statement as is wrong, and they're using the data from this paper from Dr. Ikerbasque in the Netherlands, and they're just manipulating data for their agenda, correct?
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
In as simple as that. I like what you mentioned on, and I think one of the, and I thank Dr. Maria de la Salud in UNAM in Mexico. She brought up your name when we're discussing a culture meet, and this is an episode that we'll be translating into English because I think she gave us a lot of insight and good information. And sometimes we don't think about the positive impact of grazing livestock on the environment, and a lot of things are negative, right? All the negative things that these organizations or this plant-based um, oriented industry is pushing towards. This is good news. I think this is good news that we have data, we have people saying that. This is what you said. I mean, livestock and grassing helps to reverse this, what you're mentioning, like the degradation, what you call it, degradation of land, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's very important to say also that it's only if it's managed well. And unfortunately, as in any other production aspect of our society, we have had the influence of fossil fuels and of cheap energy that have distorted a lot how things are produced. And livestock industry is no exception. So there are a lot of ways to produce animal source foods in a bad way, such as plant source foods and such as any other consumable of our society. But the good news is that there is clearly a good way or some good ways, including maybe you've heard about regenerative agriculture or even older systems like transhumance and mobile pastoralism that seem to that they may seem outdated to the ears of the people, but are very logic systems because they are just using nature's production where it happens, and they are following nature's production, and they are efficient and they are carbon neutral, which is what we know to take care of our world. And I am sure as time advances and we cannot afford to use fossil fuels anymore, we have challenges in order to keep on moving ourselves in the transport, producing electricity, and keeping the comforts that we have in modern life. But there is no doubt that we know very well how to produce a lot of livestock in a sustainable way. And that's very, very good news. And the way we are going to produce it is also helping nature and restoring the mistakes that we have been doing in this era of cheap energy.
We were talking before we started recording. One example of these plant-based people and vegan people that they oftentimes they say, "Oh, you meat people, you're destroying the world." It's like, I've heard that, and and then we started talking about this, and you give me an example of like these guys like tofu or all these plant people like rice, soy, or any other plant protein. And you were mentioning, right, like to for that production, for this plant-based production. I mean, tofu, rice, all that. They had to.
To plow the land. Yeah.
Right. Can you explain that? Because I mean, it's logic to me. It's logic. It is very logical that to plant some other plant-based like rice, and I mean, you had to destroy what was before then.
Yeah, I think the problem in our society is that we have lost contact with the rural areas, so we no longer know how nature works and also how agriculture works and how food production works, because people don't go to the village of their grandparents anymore or their great grandparents anymore, so they don't have a clue on how things go. So they see a piece of meat in the supermarket and they think death, and then they see a loaf of bread and they say, oh, that's fine, I'm not going to kill anyone. And they don't realize that crop agriculture implies plowing, implies machinery, and it implies killing a lot of animals. First of all, to prepare the land. Plowing is plowing or just removing weeds are processes that kill a lot of animals. I recently was in Colombia in the Llanos area where rice production is increasing dramatically and it's increasing at the expense of natural pastures that have been there for millions of years. And the local residents were telling me how horrible and how dramatic it is when they see that after the machines have passed by, they see the bodies and the corpses of armadillos, of foxes, of deers, of capybaras, of a lot of animals, of birds, of bird nests destroyed, a lot of animals that are very cute, that really would move our empathy, but that, when you're in the supermarket and you buy your rice bag, you just don't realize, don't imagine, and then you go happily to your home because you don't know how food production goes in the rural areas. And there is a further issue for the people that are more concerned with climate change. They also don't realize that whereas livestock production is to a large extent possible without the use of fossil fuels, if you have a look at the economic history of agriculture, of crop agriculture, you will realize that at the beginning of the 20th century, there were horrendous problems to find fertilizers. Okay, so for example, in the United States, about 60 or 70 or 80 million buffalo were killed in the 19th century, but you would wonder where the bones are. All bones were grinded in order to fertilize fields because there was a very acute lack of fertilizer for crops. And this is also the reason why all the guano islands in the Pacific, in Peru, in Chile, were mined to basically use the poo of the birds to fertilize, because at the time there was about 1.5 billion people in the world, and there were severe shortages of fertilizer to be able to feed them. What happened at the beginning of the 20th century was the invention of the Haber-Bosch process, which was initially used in the First World War to poison soldiers through, well, it's a nitrogen gas and a nitrogen derived gas. I don't remember now. Nitrous gas, yes. But then it was realized that that process could be used also to produce mineral nitrogen for agriculture. And now nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus are the major mineral fertilizers used all over the world, and that have managed to increase the world population from around 2 billion to 8 billion currently. But that has been done at the expense of using a lot of fossil fuel energy, because that production, the Haber-Bosch process uses fossil fuel, it uses natural gas. So it means that now of the 8 billion people in the world, around 6 billion are eating oil or are eating natural gas, are eating fossil fuels. And this should be much more worrying than the animal agriculture sector, especially the grass-based sector that relies on natural resources.
Wow. And that's a different perspective. And this is good. And we were talking about grassland, and I think I forgot to ask you this, but this is it a difference when we talk about like extensive or intensive production as far as water use goes?
Yes, there is a difference, because for more intensive or more intensified ways of production, you're doping the system, let's say. You're subventioning the system with external inputs. So, for example, regarding when the external inputs is mineral fertilizer, because also very often grasslands are fertilized with mineral fertilizer with nitrogen. You have a problem of gray water footprint. Okay. Why? Because you put so much nitrogen in the fields that a lot of it leaks and pollutes aquifers that can no longer be used for the other uses because they are polluted. When we are talking about, for example, pork systems or chicken systems that they don't feed on grass, so they don't get this type of input, but what they get is fodder input. You have two types of problems for water pollution. One is that they produce excreta, they produce poo, and that poo again has to be diluted in order not to be pollutant, and that's a lot of water. And by tiny mistakes in the way that you manage all this sewage, you can have horrendous cases of water pollution. So again, the gray water footprint can be very large. But to that, you should add the water that has been used to produce the the fodder that you are feeding these animals with. Because very often you had to irrigate fields in order to produce, for example, the corn that you are feeding the chicken or the porks with. Whereas when you are talking about grazed systems that are grazing natural rangelands that are not supplemented with mineral fertilizer, you are not doing anything of that. You are not bringing fodder from anywhere. You are not fertilizing the soil with mineral fertilizer. The amount of manure that the animals are producing is exactly what nature needs for keeping the soil fertile. It's not going to be too much so that it leaks into the water. It's just perfect. And this is the advantage of these livestock management systems that I was talking about.
So like a feedlot, like beef and you mentioned pork production. So the proportion what we're talking about, because this 50,000 liter number that we were talking in the beginning was for green water footprint, and then when we go from that to this feedlot system or confined systems, the gray water footprint goes up. In
Yes.
I
But
think
it's
it's
not
good.
going, it's going to go up, but it's not going to go up to 15,000 liters. That we must say it also. But
That's
yes,
good.
but the blue water and the gray water are going to go up. And these are the ones that matter.
Perfect. And that's good to point out. And that's what I actually meant by my question, that it goes up, but not to that extent or to that degree. So, all right. Well, I think this has been awesome. This has been awesome. I think we talk about I mean the examples that we mentioned, and I think it is a topic that is a very controversial one. And when you have people, they always gonna find some reasons to not eat meat, right? It's not even by even by explaining the real data about what this research paper from Dr.
Hoekstra.
Ukstra
Hoekstra.
from Dr.
Yes.
Ukstra. Well, we'll put this paper Dr. Rookstra here on the links and on the video, so you guys can learn more about this. That a lot of these values gotten from that paper have been misinterpreted, and that's also important to know that some people's, to their advantage, they manage to change the data and put it like this, like the example. We can put it back on the screen. Because when you look at that, when you look at that sign, it's just wow. I mean, for a lot of people not knowing anything about science, that a lot of the consumers are that way, right? I mean, they're not going to spend 2 or 3 hours reading this paper, right? They just go by what they see and what the other people say, and that's scary.
Yeah, and I think the problem here is I respect the moral stances of people, so people have the right to be vegan or vegetarian, of course. But what I don't think it's acceptable is to manipulate information and to cheat and to tell people things that are not true. So you may have a moral stance that you don't want to be responsible for the direct death of an animal, even if you are responsible inevitably for the death of in their indirect death of many animals. Like for example, the people that stop using wool in their clothes because they don't want to exploit sheep, but then they use artificial fabrics like polyester and things like that are actually shedding microfibers that are polluting the waters, that are killing fishes, that are killing whales, that are killing dolphins, and that may ultimately also kill people in terrestrial ecosystems because then the microfibers are taken by the rain and then they go into continental waters. I think they're wrong, but okay, it's a moral stance. I'm not going to enter into that. But what I what I cannot tolerate is that they manipulate scientific information for their purposes, and that they manipulate it intentionally in a wrong way to confuse the consumer. That's not right, and that they should stop doing that.
I agree. I agree. And platforms like this, I think it's our responsibility to talk about the truth. This is a science-based podcast. When we talk about science-based topics from an unbiased perspective. Like we like to talk about data and what is close to being real. So well, thank you for your time, Dr. Manzano. I hope we get to know you soon in person. Thank you a lot for your time. I don't know if you, well, actually, yes, I forgot to ask a question that I will always ask all our guests. How this passion started about being I mean, we talk about ecologists or environmentalists. How you end up in this role, like fighting for animal agriculture?
Well, I am a big city boy, grown up in the city of Madrid, so pretty urban, everything, and nature had a very positive and very soothing effect on me. So I was fascinated by nature, and I knew I wanted to be an ecologist, and I had an environmentalist conscience since I was very little. But my fascination with livestock and with mobile livestock and with also with wild herbivores that I also work with and that have analogous functions in the ecosystem comes from this fascinating dance that nature orchestrates in the animal migrations that I find absolutely fascinating. And that I saw in the documentaries on TV on the Serengeti and the migration crossing the River Mara and the birds crossing continents, but that I have also seen with my own eyes while doing my work. So I'm still very passionate about my work.
Keep that. I really admire you, and I really hope to get to know you soon, get some coffee together. Thank you very much for your time. I know it's getting late over there. Thank you again for being on MeatsPad, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, and thank you for your good work. Bye bye.